Father's Day is probably a very sad day for some of the people whose families have just lost their Black fathers. So I'm thinking about them at this moment. I also want to make a comment about, before we really get started, that we are all sitting on land that was indigenously owned and Native American land, and we should probably put that into our minds today as well, every day actually. So I want to start with a poem. Some of you know this poem. The Thing Is by Ellen Bass. To love life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weighs you down like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief, you think. Excuse me, oh, an obesity of grief. You think, how can a body withstand this? Then you hold life like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes. And you say, yes, I will take you, I will love you again. I love that poem, and it sets a tone for what I'm going to be talking about this morning. I would like to say hi to my daughter, Melise, who's there. Hi, Melise. I'm so happy you're here, honey. And those of you who don't know Melise, Melise began a wonderful website. She's no longer affiliated with it, but some of you know about it well and good. It's a fabulous, fabulous site, and exists because of Melise and her former business partner. So this is, I want to welcome you to my home. People, you know, we do this, we enter people's homes, but they never welcome them. And I thought, gee, I want to welcome everybody. So this is my home. This is our meditation space. Behind me is our altar. You can't really see it. One side, in the center is Buddha. On one side is an image that Susan did of a Buddha face. On the other side is a print I made of Bodhidharma and Dogen together. I really respect those two ancients and think about what they've a lot. I have Joan Halifax. We have Joan Halifax's picture on one side and the Dalai Lama's on the other. And then there are a couple of other small Buddhists that were given to us or that we bought overseas. The handwritten copy of the Heart Sutra was given to me by Marty, whose last name I can't remember, who was a member of our Sangha, and it was a gift during my Jukai. Just a wonderful gift. It's been hanging in that space now a long time. I'm not sure when I took Jukai. May 24th, 2015. So it's been hanging there 5 years. I look at it multiple times daily, and now look, we're doing Commit to Sit, studying the Heart Sutra. So it's kind of wonderful that this is all circling around. When I began planning this talk, my ideas were coming out of the experiences of staying with home with COVID-19. And that plague, I think of it as a plague, not just a pandemic. It's a plague on us in so many different ways. And then the recent murder of George Floyd and the recognition of so many other deaths of Black and other persons of color created a greater sense of the need for me to tell my story and to share this practice with you. But before I go any further, I want to read these names to you. Clifford Crover, Claude Reese, Randy Evans, Yvonne Smallwood, Amadal Diallo, Sean Bell, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Jordan Davis, Jonathan Farrell, Ayanna Jones, Eric Garner, John Crawford, Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Charleston 9, Sandra Bland, Corey Jones, Alton Sterling, Philandro Castile, Terrence Crutcher, Keith Scott, Jordan Edwards, Stefan Clark, Botham Sean, Atatiana Jefferson, Amode Arbery, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks. I want to tell you that reading that list was not easy. Along on this list, which I'll just show you here briefly, along that list was the following. I can walk alone. I can plan a party. I can ask the police a question. I can cash a check. I can take out my wallet. I can hold a hairbrush. I can party on New Year's. I can walk home. I can play loud music. I can ask for help. I can sleep. I can breathe. I can shop at Walmart. I can walk from the store. I can play cops and robbers. I can run. I can live. I can go to church. I can get a traffic ticket. I can have car problems. I can sell CDs. I can lawfully carry a weapon. I can stand next to my car. I can leave a party. I can have a cell phone. I can relax in my own home. I can look out of the window. I can go jogging. I won't be murdered. So if you aren't ready to do this, please do it now with me and gather your attention. Take a deep breath, please. This is the moment, one of these moments that Joan Halifax was talking about when she was talking and teaching the grace model. Notice your breath. The breath that's a constant reminder of our life. Notice your body. What are you feeling now? Particularly after I read those names in that poem, I guess. And ask yourself, what is, really recall your intention. Why are you here? And I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean, why are you here really? What do you have to offer? So in the epigraph of Howard's End, the novel by E.M. Forster, he wrote, "Only connect." And Richie Davidson, who's just up the road a bit in Madison and runs that wonderful Center for the Study of Mind and Meditation at Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin. Pat and I saw him in a webinar a few weeks ago, and he said that there were certain lessons from the pandemic of COVID-19, and I think more than COVID-19, really, I think all these murders as well. They are interdependence, basic goodness, social connection while being physically distant, appreciation of others, rejoicing in our meta awareness, such things as remembering not to touch our face, or the rules of interaction, not shaking hands anymore, giving elbows or this. And resilience, recognizing that crap happens and that we can rapidly recover from adversity, even though it's tough. So connection with others and interdependence are part of what he calls his 4 pillars of a healthy mind. And the pillars are awareness, meaning attention to our meta awareness, connections, like Yam Forster said, only connect, insight or self-knowledge, and finding our own true north, our purpose. Why are we here? So I want to tell you a little of my story about these last 3 months. I was lucky in a way. I was forced to stay in because on March 9th, I had my knee replaced. But after a few weeks, it began to get a little old anyway, staying at home. And they became difficult at best. I'm not telling you anything. You've been living through the horror of George Floyd's murder and the violence and Rayshard Brooks, thank you. Just had a senior moment. Rayshard Brooks' murder as well, and all the violence that's followed that. And personally, they've been a trial for me. I struggled with the events surrounding the names I read, knowing full well there were hundreds and hundreds of more names. And I struggled with concerns over COVID-19. I'm 77. I'm anxious about, I don't want to get it. I don't want to die. I want to be fulfilled with my loving family. I generally am not somebody who's prone to significant anxiety or depression, but I felt myself falling into a crevice between one wall of COVID-19, self-quarantine, and the resulting desperate isolation from family and friends, and then the other wall of Trumpian narcissism and inhumanity, political and tribal strife, and now these awful murders. Feeling myself fall into that crevice allowed me to recognize that there was a lot to learn from its depth. For me, COVID-19, self-quarantine, Mr. Trump, and our national strife really taught me something very, very good. I realized that my heart, literally my heart had broken wide open. So wide open that I realized that I had more to give and to care about than to be angry about. All of that, really, that breaking open was long before George Floyd's murder. One day I rose from my meditation and I realized that I had just simply stopped being concerned solely about myself. Worried about my knee, worried about this or that, it stopped. Just stopped. And after a couple of days of that, which was really, really strange for me, that I wouldn't be thinking about myself in my meditation. Sorry. I really wondered what happened to me. And it took me a couple of weeks of, as Dogen says, taking some backward steps and turning my thoughts inward to begin to realize that I was really concerned for all those in the midst of physical distancing, not just about others generally, but about their well-being and their joy and their safety and their situation, and wishing, yes, that they would be free from suffering. And of course, that intensified with the accelerated social anger following George Floyd's murder and then the most recent events. I might have thought that I would have lost it with those murders, that I would have gone back to my old self. But in fact, even with those murders, I was becoming much more equanimous, more open than I think I've ever been. I began to realize that what I've strived to be in the past, I realize now that I never had. I feel a lot more compassion, love, equanimity. I don't know that it is unbounded. I truly don't. But this love is really strong. Now, I don't seem to follow right now, sorry, I'm reading. I don't seem to follow every judgment my mind makes. You'd think that I've really learned and assimilated that after 20 years of practice, but no, I didn't. What I intellectually knew, but I had not really lived or embraced, was that I had to take responsibility for my judgments. I had to take responsibility for my anger. I had to take responsibility for my wrong words, responsibility for my wrong actions, unwise actions, responsibility for lack of respect for those who think differently from me. And yes, responsibility for my grief, my deep grief about what's been happening in the US, our reprehensible Congress and dishonorable executive. Grief about my inability to visit my children, to not hold my grandson. And then grief over the unforgivable police military-like actions against Black men, people of color, and protesters. Grief overwhelmed me for a while. I'm feeling it right now. I was heartened to learn more about this overwhelming of grief during a Zoom webinar with Joan Halifax and Franco Staszewski a few weeks ago. You know, just as an aside, this is another great thing about COVID and social distancing. All this stuff that was unavailable to us, all these wonderful Dharma talks, all these wonderful webinars that are run through other Zen centers, fantastic opportunity. I was just talking with Diane about this the other day. We agreed it's just sensational. So Roshi Jones said during that one of those, it was a 3-day webinar, 3 different Fridays. She said, grief is love that has nowhere to go. And then she added this offering meditation, which I'll share with you right now. Michael, I need you to enable participant screen sharing if you can. Can you do that? Otherwise, I'll just read it. Yes, no, give me a hand up or no.
Just did.
You did, oh great, thank you. Okay. And you can, if you're on mute, which I hope everybody is, you can read this along with me. May I be open to the suffering of grief. May I find the inner resources to be present for the truth of loss. May I fully face life and death, loss and sorrow. May I see that loss is part of life. May I accept the suffering around loss, knowing that it does not make me bad or wrong. May I offer love, knowing that I cannot control the course of life, suffering, or death. So I've decided to dedicate this offering this morning to the well-being of others as part of my practice, as I've decided to open up that grief and to love. Dogen says in Genjo Koan, when the truth has not yet completely filled somebody's body and mind, he's apt to think that his knowledge of the Dharma is already sufficient. When the truth sufficiently fills his body and mind, he feels sure that some aspect is still lacking. Well, I can tell you, I still feel like a lot is still lacking. I feel like I want to help others so much more than I ever have. I want to heal ills. I want to change Trump, but I can't simply do those things. So now in my Zazen, I also practice loving kindness along with my Tonglen for Donald Trump. Mark, are you here? Yes, Mark Pettigrew is here. A few weeks ago, during our Saturday morning debrief, Mark said to me, I said something about Tonglen, and Mark said to me, are you still hugging Trump during Zazen? So I want to give you all the backstory to that. I shit, yeah, I do shit. I sit shikantaza, just sitting. About 13 years ago, before I went into Zen, I was studying Tibetan Buddhism, and I was studying Lojong. Lojong means mind training. Tonglen is made up of 2 of the 59 slogans from the 7 points of mind training. The 2 Tonglen slogans are, sending and receiving should be practiced alternately. And the other, these 2 should ride the breath. It was at that time that I started to practice Tonglen. It wasn't easy, but I learned it and practiced it for a long time. But then when I entered Zen practice, I guess I ought to back up for a second. I ought to tell you what those, sending and receiving should be practiced alternately means you should practice first on yourself and then on the other. So you practice on yourself, breathing nasty things about yourself into yourself and breathing out all wonderful love and caring to yourself. And you do this until you really feel that you've accomplished something. and then the receiving, and then you deal with another person or other things, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. So when I entered Zen practice, I had a crazy thought, and I was telling Diane the other day that this is like number 949 of the crazy thoughts that Zen students have. You know, we all have crazy thoughts. And this one is, no, you can't think about something in Zazen. You're not allowed to think. You can't do something like Zazen. It just doesn't fit. You just have to sit. So I stopped, mistakenly. But once when Pat and I were at Upaya, it didn't get me to start right away, but this was a teaching, a learning for me. We were there with Sharon Salzberg and Roshi Joan Halifax, and I want to tell you, by the way, that was a great weekend. Roshi Joan told us that Sharon had told her about the four immeasurables and that she should meditate on them, and Roshi Joan demurred, said, no way, and Sharon, and they were talking about the past because Roshi Joan is doing it now, but Sharon said, just try it already, just try it. And she did, and now she practices it. So I thought, well, if she can do that, then I can do Tonglen. So I gave permission to myself to do Tonglen during Zen practice. But then somehow I dropped it again. But when Donald Trump became president, I was so horrified. I began to practice my Tonglen again. And then somehow I dropped it again. Excuse me, no, didn't drop it again, but I changed how I did it, sorry. So in Tonglen, I told you, we begin by sending and receiving with ourselves. What are we sending and receiving? Since we're starting with ourselves, whatever is painful or undesirable, we breathe it in. Don't resist it. We surrender to ourselves, to acknowledge who we are. As these undesired feelings and emotions rise up, we actually breathe them in and connect with all that humans feel. So I was breathing in my hatred, my absolute hatred for Donald Trump. And I recognize that as a negative thing. It was an awful thing. I was breathing it in and I was taking care of myself, breathing out. We all know what it's like to feel pain, right? Everybody feels pain, suffering, no matter what it looks like. So I was pulling in this pain and suffering that I was feeling and breathing it out, breathing, trying to heal myself. And it worked. It worked. What I really like about Tonglen is while I'm starting with myself, I'm undeniably able to recognize that I'm a cousin to all beings. All beings are a part of me and I'm a part of them. Because all beings are suffering. Pema Chodron said, you can know it in yourself, you can know it in everyone. This practice cuts through culture, economic status, intelligence, race, religion. People everywhere feel pain, jealousy, anger, being left out, feeling lonely. Everybody feels that exactly the way you feel it. The storylines vary, but the underlying feeling is the same for all of us. Don't you just love Pema Chodron? She's so right there. As Diane told us several weeks ago, this practice of Tonglen requires our first establishing the ground of bodhicitta. That sense of space that is a vast, tender, empathy heart is bodhicitta. It's our awakened heart. In the stages of Tonglen, the structure is really easy. The process can be daunting, but the structure is really easy. First, we flash open this absolute, our heart of absolute bodhicitta. The wide open heart I spoke of in myself earlier. We break open our hearts of lead and steel. You know, we can encase them. You know, we walk down the street, we see a homeless person and we encase our heart. We don't want to touch that. We see somebody crazy. We don't want to touch it. We hear Trump. So we break those hearts open. We open wideness to love. We're not worried about anything. We're not worried about anything else because we also have strong backs of equanimity. Joan Halifax always says, strong back of equanimity, soft front of compassion. Excuse me, strong back of equanimity, soft heart of compassion. Then we visualize breathing in dark, heavy, sooty, hot essence, which is the cause of suffering. Suffering, which is to hold on to things, to listen to ego. And we breathe out bright, light, coolness. We breathe out love. We're breathing out this light and coolness, love through every, not just our heart, but through every pore of our body. Pain is coming in, love is going out. Breathing in, that pain, that suffering, breathing out from our heart, our body. Next, we select a specific person, animal, tree, plant, or the earth that we want to help. We breathe in the pain of that being, plant, tree, person, animal, or the earth. And we breathe out to it or them spaciousness, kindness, a meal to a homeless person, a cup of coffee to a friend, a bouquet of flowers to ill people, support to someone who's having problems, or a hug to Donald Trump. Finally, we extend our Tonglen practice as a wish to relieve suffering to those who we know need it even more. Homeless people, people ill with COVID-19, the families of George Floyd, and all the other families of murdered Black men and women, the family of Derek Chauvin, the Native Americans who haven't gotten their rights, and even to Derek Chauvin himself, the policeman who kneeled on the neck of George Floyd. So that's the Tonglen practice that I did for many years, but now I've modified it. And I add to it the 4 immeasurables. I hope this isn't getting too complicated for you all. Give me a sign. Is it complicated? Yes, no, it's okay. Okay, good. Okay, thanks. So the 4 immeasurables, also called the Brahma Viharas. Maybe many of you know these. If you don't, I hope you look into them after this. They're wonderful. The first is loving kindness, Metta in Pali. The second is compassion, Karuna, both in Pali and Sanskrit. Empathic joy, or mudita in Pali and Sanskrit. And equanimity, which is upekkha in Pali. Let me start with Metta. Metta is loving kindness. There's no possession of something or someone with Metta. Really, we all know there's no possession and no possessor. It's all empty. It's the highest kind of love. In Metta, we don't think of ourselves because that self is just delusion, right? In fact, Theravada Buddhism suggests that the near enemy of loving kindness is selfish affection. Loving kindness comes from a deeper source within and embraces all beings, whether weak or strong, tall or short, big or small. As the Metta Sutra says, nor do we withhold loving kindness for those noble-minded or low-minded, good or evil, as the Venerable Suma Baruna of Wat Thai Buddhist Temple in Los Angeles says. In fact, he reminds us that the low-minded and evil are included because they're the ones most in need of loving kindness. In many evil persons, he says, the seed of goodness may have died merely because warmth for its growth was lacking. It perishes from cold in a loveless world. We do not wish ill will for such patients. Painful ill will is the far enemy of loving kindness. Not harboring ill will is really pertinent to my loving kindness practice involving Tonglen for Donald Trump, or for anyone for that matter. And I can't help thinking about him, Donald Trump, as I reflect on perishing from a cold, loveless heart in a cold, loveless world. The Chinese poet Shi Tong said that our loving kindness practice must also look at our own personal desires. He said, although gold dust is precious, when it gets in your eyes, it obstructs your vision. Don't you just love that? And Jack Kornfield, who I also love, he's just a great talk speaker and a great writer. This comes from his book, The Wise Heart, which is on Buddhist psychology. He says, desire creates a tension in the body, an emotional contraction, a stickiness of mind, a focus on the future. There's a driven quality, anxiety, jealousy, rigidity, and insecurity all become stronger. Well, I don't want that. I don't think any of us do. And it all leads to addictions. The more we desire, the more we focus on wanting things, the more we get addicted to those things. We know that's a state of the hungry ghost, right? So I've realized that to deal with those desires and my own personal kinds of addiction, we have to face them straight on. One way is through for me now is regular loving kindness practice. Focus on the good in myself and in others. Karuna is compassion. I often hear people say that I have pity for someone, that they have pity for someone, you know, quote unquote, I have pity for someone. They think they're being compassionate, but not really. Pity is the near enemy of compassion. Roshi once told me that pity can often be linked to contempt and dislike. I believe it. Compassion involves empathy, the element necessary for compassion, and has no negative feelings, like cruelty, which is the far, far enemy of compassion. I'm not certain that I could be so aware of suffering, that of myself and that of others, if I did not have compassion. Brian Joshin Burns said that, who's going to be speaking to us in August, by the way. Brian Joshin Burns said that Bernie Glassman believes plunges like street retreats were the best way to teach compassion. I imagine that's correct. I think instead of pitying others, a street person, for example, I can see through my compassion that their lives are much harder than my own. If I pity them, I think I'm being dismissive. I think it's pretty hard to pity when you're doing a street retreat or sitting in the killing space of Auschwitz. Santideva, so I'm going to let you read this too. Shantideva, who wrote The Way of the Bodhisattva, it's just an incredible piece of work, said, for all those ailing in the world, until every sickness has been healed, may I myself become for them the doctor, nurse, the medicine itself. Raining down a flood of food and drink, may I spell the ills of thirst and famine. And in the eons marked by scarcity and want, may I myself appear as drink and sustenance. For sentient beings, poor and destitute, may I become a treasure ever plentiful and lie before them closely in their reach, a varied source of all that they might need. This indeed is compassion. Mudita is sympathetic joy. Hang on, getting myself organized here. My papers are overflowing, guys. Mudita is sympathetic joy. In preparing this talk, I was impressed with what many authors say about sympathetic joy. They say it's equal to compassion in opening our hearts, that it's quite simply means sharing in the joy of others. When someone tells us that something is wonderful to them or for them, so often we're resentful. Oh, I wish I had that. But that's not compassion, of course, nor is it helpful to ourselves or them. I think we all garner more joy when we share in the happiness that others exclaim. And I think that so much sadness and hopelessness exists in this world that seeing another's momentary joy must bring more solace to them and hopefully less suffering. And finally, upekkha, equanimity. I think equanimity may be as important or even more important than compassion in this practice, because without equanimity, we could be indifferent to the problems of others or ignore our own difficulties or worse, deny them. This is the near enemy of equanimity, denial. Or we could crave what others have or cling to our own thoughts or beliefs. So there we have the four immeasurables. How do we meditate with them? We begin with sentient beings who do not have happiness, and we wish that they have happiness and its causes. May I, and you can say these after me, please. May I be happy. May I be at ease. May all beings find happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be at ease. Then we move to compassion. And we wish that those who are suffering be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings near and far, known and unknown, be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. There are many who have no joy, and we wish for them that they find that joy, and we wish that we can enjoy their joy with them. May all beings have mental happiness and never be separated from that happiness. May they live in safety. Finally, we wish to see everyone as the same. That is, the wish to dispel attitudes of attachment and aversion, and to be of help and benefit to all beings. May I be at ease. May I be free of attachment and aversion, anger or guilt. May all beings be free of attachment and aversion, anger or guilt. So going back to my Tonglen practice, when I do Tonglen for Donald Trump, I breathe in the awful, inhumane essence of him and breathe out, may you find some core of happiness. Breathe in his disturbing way of speaking ill of others, and breathe out, may you be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. And I continue this for all four immeasurables and repeat that process until I feel that I've done it sufficiently. And I'm doing Tonglen. I'm breathing in and out. I'm just not repeating the words. So that, my friends, is Metta and loving kindness. And I want to read you one more poem, and then I'd like us all to read the Metta Sutra together. Let me see what time it is. Oh, good, we're great. This is called Kindness, and again, my poetry group knows this poem. The rest of you, maybe some of you do too. It's by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out of the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and send you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow and a friend. So let's read the Metta Sutta together. I hope you're all in for this. I hope you can all read this. This is what should be done by one who's skilled in goodness and one who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive the other or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, during all one's walking hours, may they practice loving kindness with all their might. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views of greed, anger, and ignorance, a pure-hearted one having clarity of vision is freed from all sense desires and the endless round of becoming. May all beings be free from suffering. Thank you. Now, maybe any comments, any questions? Or should I just go off into the sunset?
Mark, could you say more about where the Metta Sutra comes from?
It's, there are two different versions, Eve. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can pull out something. I can't at the moment. But there are two different versions, and if it's in the Pali Canon. If you look it up, you'll find the, I can send this. There are very, very many different translations.
Mark, I want to thank you. This was a fabulous talk. It touched on something that's so well needed right now during all of this. And one funny thought I had when you were talking about desires is I wish to be free of all desires.
Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't that be lovely? Thank you, Shinko.
Yeah, thank you.
However,
Yeah.
however,
Yes.
now one of the things I so love and appreciate about Eve Marco and her absolutely radical book with Ngyoku is the land of attachments, and being cognizant of the fact that we have attachments without whom and which we would have a poverty-stricken life, or could. So a plug for, I mean, I'm making a comparison here of desire to attachment, and that's too powerful a connection, so I don't mean to say that desire is a necessary road to attachment. But that heart of compassion, we are attached to our hearts of compassion.
And if I can, Susan, you know, we're studying the Heart Sutra now, and the other side of that is it's all emptiness, and we make it what we perceive it as. So desire is not necessarily a bad thing. It's how we make it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to put a plug in also for reading the Heart Sutra again and again. These daily little pieces are great. I find myself with each of these pieces going back and reading the whole thing, because the piece sort of gets disembodied from the whole.
I really appreciate the way that you have interwoven Lojong or Tonglen with loving kindness, with Metta. That's really lovely, and it's really powerful. Appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you, Chris. It actually happened by accident. You might imagine that, you know, I was just doing that, and then I was doing loving kindness, and all of a sudden I was doing both.
I really liked hearing your personal process, Mark, and how you got to where you are today. And I appreciate your openness and honesty. Thank you for this morning. I thought it was great.
Thank you, Robin. You guys know me. I'm nothing if I'm not open and honest, sometimes to a fault. But thank you.
Mark, when
Hi,
you
Donna.
hi, when you do the Tonglen, are you doing it for your whole sit, or you do it for a portion of the sit?
Good question. No, just for a portion. Mostly I'm just doing Shinkantaza, just sitting, sitting.
Okay.
But I sort of I start and I just do Shinkantaza, and then but it's always there in the back of my mind. So I then start doing the Tonglen and Four Immeasurables, and then I let it go and end with just Shinkantaza, because I don't want to really end with thoughts, and I don't really want to begin with thoughts. I just want to settle into my body and drop my mind as much as possible at the beginning and at the end.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for, and thank you for this talk. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. I'm so glad we have so many people here today, too. Hi, Nanette.
Hi, Mark.
Nanette is speaking next week.
I am.
Nanette is Manshan, and she is at Upaya. And are you going to be speaking from Upaya, Nanette?
I am. I love to, right now I'm in my home and I love to speak from here, but last time I did that, my internet totally punked out, and I do not want that to happen to you.
Oh, I'm glad. So you're in for a treat next week, guys, with Nanette Munshin overlay.
I have a question for you about earlier on when you were talking about taking responsibility for your grief, and I really just those words and that framing of taking responsibility for it. I wonder, it made me think, you know, what is that? Is it just deeply entering into and meeting it as it's there for you? So maybe you could say more about taking responsibility for you.
Yeah, thank you. I love that question. So a lot of that came out of really, I talked about that crevice that I felt like I was in, and it was almost like, if you remember the terrible story of the guy that was hiking and he found himself in a crevice and he literally had to cut his arm off to get out. And I found myself kind of in this crevice where I was really, really hurting. And I was really grief stricken by what's been happening. And I was close to being, I've never really been terribly depressed, but I was close to getting really depressed. And at that moment, I began to really confront myself and look at all of those things. And the more I thought about them, the more that I recognized that each of those things, it was me that had to deal with it and not somebody else. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I appreciate you going back to the visceral kind of description of feeling like you were in a crevice. And also it reminds me of something that I just came across in my preparing for next week, about the kind of despair that we all feel, and like the immensity of the suffering that we are responsible for and part of and witness to and so on. And I went back to studying the Book of Joy, the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu.
Yeah.
The Archbishop says, despair points us back in towards ourself, but hope sends us into the arms of others. And I thought,
Wow.
This despairing quality, it keeps us, it's kind of a self-centered place that we get a little bit stuck. And the grief, I forget the quote from Roshi Joan that you brought in, but the grief is like out, it's not that you totally feel it inward, but it's also an expression of love that goes out. So I really appreciate how you brought just grief in as part of the landscape right now and how to work with it.
Well, when I was in that crevice, I was feeling, despair is great. I really like that you brought that up, because I was feeling despair, and I was, well, one night, I will be really honest with you all, during all of this, I was having a terrible time sleeping for 3 or 4 nights. I just could not sleep. And the cats get pat up every 2 hours, and she has spoiled them lovingly and feeds them. But one night she got back into bed, and I just started sobbing. I talked to her, I said, I think maybe I am depressed or something, and I started sobbing. And that was a moment when I recognized deeply my grief. I wasn't really depressed. I realized I was grief-stricken over what's happened. And all of that, Nanette, helped me then focus on these things. But I don't want you to think that I'm some omniscient kind of capable person. This all came in little bits, and then as I was writing this over the last couple of weeks, it all sort of came into me of what I had been experiencing and thinking about. Thank you. Thank you. What time is it, guys? Is it time?
It's not. Mark, I have a question.
Yes.
So in these days, I have, and this is going to be a question. I'm trying to hold 2 things at once. I'm trying to hold some, and it is visceral, a sense of the absolute, of indivisibility, interconnection, of the sameness, of the fact that all human beings, as you said, suffer. I mean, all human beings know joy, all human beings know suffering, okay? On the other hand, there are undeniably different stories, contexts, histories, politics, socio-political wrongdoings. Stories are very different. So what is your take on holding both awarenesses at once, or whether it's simultaneous? Do you follow my question?
I do. You know, just let me take a brief digression. So I've been part of a Dogen study group for over 3 years now. And Dogen talks about this all the time in different ways. Basically, Dogen says we always are practicing. We always are aware. And I think that it's not easy to hold both things, but I think, Susan, that if we're aware of all of the good, I think this is what you're talking about, all of the good in the world and all the things that are not good simultaneously. Is this correct?
No.
Oh.
Not exactly, although that's a good point. But I'm talking about the absolute and the relative, or emptiness and form. I mean,
yeah.
But putting human beings into that, and that is a concept. That is a concept of putting human beings into some notion of the absolute and the relative, or emptiness and form.
Mm. I wish that I were really capable of answering this question well. The answer that I've got is I'm not certain. I'm not certain how I do or if I do. Fair enough at the moment?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great things about Tonglen Lojong practice, in Lojong practice, you learn about the relative and the absolute, and you must deal with them before you actually begin the slogans. A couple of years ago, we studied Norman Fisher's book in our Sangha on the Lojong practice. And he talks about that in the beginning, not quite in the way the Tibetans do. But, you know, the relative is what we deal with every day, and the absolute is recognizing the emptiness of it all. But it's difficult to do that.
Well, it is. I mean, and then an example I'm thinking of is seeing someone who appears to be other than me, okay? And I can look at that person and think we are the same in this cosmic soup. But boy, does that undercut that person's story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to hold both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant. That made sense to me.
I might have made sense, but I'm not always sure that I understand everything that I say.
Hey, Mark, I've got a question for you if I can. It's
Yeah,
Craig.
hi, Craig. Craig,
Hey.
are we Dharma Brothers and that other Commit to Sit?
We are, yes.
Oh, I thought it was you, and I wasn't sure. Hi. Okay.
I wasn't going to ask this question today because it's a little out of context, but you brought up Dogen, so I thought, well, I'm going to ask you this question. I realized the past few days finally that one of my charges in terms of learning through this experience is to learn to deal with something within me which too often rushes to judgment about things I'm reading or hearing. Now, you know, you and I have had different interpretations of different responses to Dogen, and I'm still a relative neophyte. You've been with this material and living it for so long. I do have to say your reaction to it is somewhat wiser than mine. That as I have objected to it, and frankly sometimes come to dread those reflections that come every day, because I know that it's going to be upsetting because I won't be able to see the wisdom in them. So I do have a general question based on that. We deal with so many texts so much material. It's antiquated. You know, it's centuries, if not millennia old. So do you find yourself, here's two options. One, I have a text, it's very old, and I don't understand it. One option is to say, I need to sit with this a long time. I'm not seeing something. I need to grow to fully understand it. But there's another option that says, you know what, this maybe was wise 600 years ago. It really has lost its wisdom. And I simply need to acknowledge that. So I wonder if you just have, I think this is a general question for everybody, or of interest to everybody, as we encounter texts or teachings. Other times when you feel like I don't understand it, but I can sense a seed of wisdom in it, and I need to grow to understand it. Or are there times when you really do encounter a teaching and say, I need to learn how to augment it or somehow change it in my head so that it is wise?
I can give you a very specific example of that. So in studying Dogen, we learned one of the fascicles has to do with toileting.
Okay.
Okay. And Dogen lived in a time when sanitary conditions were not ours. So we studied this, and it was really interesting. We came to understand that one of the things Dogen was trying to do was to make sure that his monks in the Heiji temple, his temple, followed rules and regulations to keep them all as clean and as safe as possible. But the other thing we recognized as a group today was that it's important to find ways of keeping things clean today, that we could extrapolate that. So I think that's a great example for me. There are times when I don't understand Dogen. I mean, telling you, we're on fascicle number 13 or 14 now, and we've been studying for plus Fukanza Zenji, which doesn't have a number. So say 14 or 15 fascicles, and we've been studying for over 3 years. We take a long time, Craig, to look at these things. And so it's not surprising that you just entering into it wouldn't have the same reaction or the same sort of understanding or way into it, maybe not understanding, but way into it that I do. I'm not sure that I always have wisdom. It's just that I have another way into it.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I really appreciate it. And it's so much fun being on there with somebody I know.
Same here.
We are in the New York Zen Center for Contemplatives Cares. Commit to Sit, and it's an ongo. It's 90 days. And the speakers are very interesting. I'm going to try to get a couple of those speakers for us on Sunday Morning Zen. I've already put my hand out to a couple. So
I was heartened the other day in a Q&A that one of the Zen teachers said he found Dogen to be impenetrable was his word to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was somewhat comforting. And the other Zen teacher was saying, you know, don't take it so seriously.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just almost dance your way through it. You don't have to take every sentence and parse it and try to understand everything. So he'll lighten up a little bit, I think, was his message.
Well, it's 10:59.
Oh,
I thank you all. Have a great Father's Day for those who are fathers, for those who are wives or partners of fathers. Have a great day with them, and for the rest of us all, have a great day.
yeah, happy
Thank you, Mark.
Father's Day, Mark.
Thank you, Eve. I love your hair, Eve. It looks great.
It looks kind of like yours.
Yep, we both let it grow out, didn't we? You hear that, Melise? Bye, everybody.
That was
But
beautiful.
I don't know. There's a couple people have said it's kind of Bride of Frankenstein. So
Oh, no.
yeah, well, this one 29-year-old friend I have, he said it reminded him of the Munsters. And then one of my other younger colleagues, she said It was like Cruella de Vil in The 1001 Dalmatians or Glenn Close.
Eve, you're too much.
Not exactly what I was going for.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Anyway, but thank you for the talk, Mark.
Thank you, Eve.